Throughout our 120 years, Ford has supported our nation's armed forces and honored their selfless service to our country. The Central Ohio Ford dealers are proud to continue this tradition by investing in the work of the National Veterans Memorial and Museum in Columbus. Together, we want to share the veterans' heroic stories and introduce a grateful nation to the faces behind our forces. Please join us monthly to hear inspiring educational stories from our veterans who have gone above and beyond their call to defend freedom around the world. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum and your Central Ohio Ford dealers. Together, we will never forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining our latest virtual rally point with the National Veterans Memorial and Museum. My name is Colonel Retired Bill Butler, Chief of Staff, and on behalf of our President and CEO, Lieutenant General Mike Farrader, as well as Trevor Brown, Dean of the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University, welcome today. We're at another great location in Central Ohio, The Ohio State University. As we begin our week-long celebration of Veterans and Veterans Day, we thought we'd start with an inspirational symbol of selfless service. This man's personal example of courage, commitment, and honor inspired generations of others to do the same thing. Today we're talking about John Glenn, native of Ohio, Marine, combat aviator, astronaut, businessman, senator, and lifelong public servant. As well as until recently, the oldest man to enter space. Before he was catapulted into fame as an astronaut and as the first American to orbit the Earth, John Glenn was a highly decorated combat aviator in the United States Marine. He saw and served with valor in combat in both World War II, China, as well as Korea. He considered himself a veteran first and was often heard saying that his most important role in his life was that of serving in the military. This morning we'll be talking with Trevor Brown, Dean of the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, and two veterans, Air Force veteran Ivory Harlow and Marine Corps veteran Tom Wyke, both directly connected to the John Glenn College, Ohio State University, as well as the National Veterans Memorial and Museum. Our moderator is President and CEO, who also is a combat veteran of Mogadishu, Somalia, and served 3 tours of combat as a general officer, and also had a distinguished 35-year Army career. And most recently, he was inducted into the Ohio Veterans Hall of Fame in the class of 2021.
So who was John Glenn, and how did you know him?
So first off, thank you, General Farrader, and thank you, Colonel Butler, for the continued partnership with the National Veterans Memorial and Museum, which was very near and dear to Senator Glenn's heart, even though it came at the very end of his life. And to that point, you asked me about my relationship and what I knew of him. I honestly did not know him through all the phases that Colonel Butler just laid out, and it was a pleasure to hear his introduction of Senator Glenn. And so I came to know him at the very end of his life. And with all of those accomplishments, you'd think that everybody would sort of bow down to Senator Glenn, but he never allowed that to happen. He was just a total down-to-earth person who wanted to connect with people where they were. People would always want to ask him stories about all those great things we just heard about, and he'd offer something that was interesting and then immediately turn and start asking you about you. And so he was about one of the most human people I ever came to know. And it was just a pleasure to work with and for him. But as we just heard in the introduction, one of the things that was really interesting about meeting him at the phase of life that I did and many others did is he was at that stage where he was reflecting on his life and telling lots of stories about his various experiences. And when he first came to join Ohio State University, it was after he just left the Senate. So we heard a lot of great stories about the Senate. And then we celebrated the anniversary of Friendship 7 orbiting the Earth, so we heard about his NASA days. But then as he approached what I think he knew was coming, which was his trip to whatever came next as he passed on, he started to reflect on what he thought of as the most seminal part of his life, which was his military service. And as many folks know, perhaps in the audience listening to this, he was a Marine and he wanted to be buried a Marine. And so he called up the Marine Corps as he was planning for his death and asked, how do you bury a Marine? And they said, well, for you, Senator Glenn, we have, this gilded casket and dress uniforms. He said, no, 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 no. I'm standard issue. I want standard issue casket. I want standard issue clothing, and so that's how he was buried.
Where do you think all that comes from? Where does this humility and these great leaders come from?
Well, you know, some of it's just got to be innate. I mean, I think it's part of who he was, and where that came from, I don't know. But the other part of it was the community he grew up in, and that started with his family. He was very wedded to his parents. Loved them dearly, and then beyond that, the circle enlarged to first be Cambridge, Ohio, where he was born, and then New Concord, where he spent most of his young life. And he would tell wonderful stories about parades and baseball games and kind of the Americana of yore. But fundamentally, I think it was just being a part of a community that cared for each other and looked out for each other and made sacrifices for the good of the community. So I think as a very young boy, he just came to learn the importance of self-sacrifice for a larger purpose. And so I often think, I have a daughter who's 21 years old. He was right around that age when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And he didn't bat an eye, saying, it's time, I want to serve, I want to give back, and this is the way I can serve this country, serve the cause of freedom. And so I think that was just instilled at him at a very, very early age.
You know, with that, as you described, it's always amazing to see these great men and women rise to such a height, and they've got the option to be powerful and assertive and dominating on other people, or to be humble and service-like. And for the audience, the memorial service for General Powell was yesterday, as we do this with you today, and he similarly had all those options to be powerful and domineering and expect things, and he was similar to Senator John Glenn. Again, I wonder why, you know, how strong a character was he that he could fall on the right side of that?
You know, that's a great question, and I love the parallel to Secretary Powell. I think Senator Glenn, I know, would feel honored with that comparison. You know, it's interesting because Senator Glenn was an ambitious, competitive person. I think it's naive to say that this wasn't someone who just, you know, was willing to sacrifice all for everything. He was committed to being the best he could be. He was committed to being that top fighter pilot, to being that first American to orbit the Earth. And yet, I think he was very aware of that desire in him to exceed and excel as something that was maybe only for personal advancement and personal aggrandizement. So I think he was aware of his own human frailties, like you would hope anyone would be. And so then that begs the question of, well, how does somebody who is so aspirational and so ambitious and willing to take these tremendous risks, where, as you asked, where do the boundaries come that prevent them from going and doing harm to others, whether in, you know, small settings or large? And again, I think part of it's the community. I think he would be the first to say it was his faith. He was a man of God, and he didn't talk about it a lot. I mean, he didn't talk about that very much at all. But when he did, there was clear reverence to a set of moral standards that he thought were important. I think his time in the Marine Corps, it was just the crucible of really solidifying who he was as a person, in the sense that he wanted to be part of a team. He wanted to be part of a group. And he would occasionally remark on being a Marine aviator meant that he was above the troops on the ground. And even though he was in a position of tremendous power and influence, he always wanted to be, he felt some loss of not being part of the group on the ground. So I just think it was sort of layers and layers of accountability that he put around himself and sought out those relationships that sort of reinforced his desire to be part of a communal effort.
I think it's amazing as we work together, the National Veterans Memorial Museum and the John Glenn College, our pillars are to honor, connect, inspire, and educate, and your mission is to educate. But as I've watched you personally and watched your team, you've got that inspiration and that inculcating of qualities of character, not just knowledge. So this is a little bit more towards you, but tell everyone how you view developing young men and women from your perch as the dean here.
Well, first off, it's an honor and a privilege to be in a role like this, and fundamentally to be in an institution, particularly a land-grant institution like Ohio State University, that is committed to the betterment of the state and to finding the next John and Annie Glenn, is to creating the conditions for people who want to make the world better while also advancing themselves in that sort of professional growth mentality that Senator Glenn had. That's something that I think drives this entire operation. I mean, I think Senator Glenn obviously came here and created an ethos, but I think this institution, Ohio State, is the same in the sense that there was a reason that he wanted to come here. And it's important to note he's a proud graduate of Muskegon University, as was Annie, his wife. And yet, as much as he had connections to Muskegon, he wanted to come be a part of this land-grant institution. And we bear that responsibility to serve the state and serve the nation and the local communities across Ohio. And so I think his narrative, his story is so compelling about small town Ohio, goes off to do all these incredible things and then comes back home to keep building. But I think we all, having spent time with him, while we miss him, we're all still so committed to his vision and his mission. We all came here because we wanted to keep learning and growing, and then creating opportunities for others to do the same, notably students.
So tell us, how old would he be today?
Well, so this is part of his 100th birthday, and we're taking great liberty. I don't know what your family's like, but my children were like, it's not a birthday, it's like a birth week or a birth month.
I have a friend.
So we're doing a birth year for
Yeah.
Senator Glenn. Yes, his birthday was July 18th. He would have been 100 years old this past July, and so we're stretching that out over the year, in large part because with each year of his life, he accomplished so many things, and over the decades, it's hard to pack it all into one day. So this particular period of time, we're celebrating his military service. And for him, military service was public service. He saw that as again, I think perhaps the consummate way to give back and serve your fellow citizen.
So most of my stories start, there I was minding my own business when suddenly, and the phone rang and someone asked me if I wanted to be the president and founding CEO of the National Veterans Memorial Museum. Sounded intriguing. I traveled from Columbus, Georgia to Columbus, Ohio. So I didn't have to change the whole address on our mail. And 3 years ago, on the 28th of October, we opened. But several months before that, in my first month here, the first person I met in town outside of Guy Worley was you. And we were in a conference room with a delightful lunch and getting to know each other. And I had some big ideas on what I wanted the NVM to be. Much more than a museum, I wanted to impact the lives of our veterans in our community. And we started a conversation, and just describe a little bit what you remember of what we sort of talked about, but most importantly, what came out of that conversation.
Well, first off, I remember your enthusiasm, and I remember your excitement about this opportunity, and that statement you just made was apparent then too. It wasn't just going to be a building with some artifacts in it. It was going to be a home where veterans could come and feel connected, but knowing that they were going to be spread out across the country, if not the world. You had that vision of how do we create programs that go beyond the walls of the beautiful National Veterans and Memorial Museum. So that was inspiring, because that's what we want to do too. We have a beautiful space, but we know the real impact is the people who spend some time here and then go off and do amazing things in the world. And again, that story of Senator Glenn is that narrative repeated. So I remember us sitting down and thinking, how do we take that idea of creating a place where people could convene, but then also spread the great impact of the work that we do. And Senator Glenn was at first, he was a child and all that, but I think his first true role was as a student. He was a very curious person. He was always interested by the world, wanted to understand how things work. And so for him, school and education was such a powerful launch pad for all the things that came next. So taking your enthusiasm and desire to spread the impact of NVMM with his insight into the power of education, we came up with this idea to create some kind of educational program to serve veterans, another important dimension of Senator Glenn's life and obviously the mission of NVMM. And so then we just started batting around ideas about how could we do that, knowing that veterans would not necessarily all be able to come do a 2 or a 4 or a 5-year degree if it's a PhD. How could we give them an educational experience that would help solidify all that they learned in the military and be recognized by other individuals and entities, corporations, governments, et cetera, somehow certify educationally that experience they'd had in the military while helping them to continue to think and reflect and grow. So those were that's what I remember talking about. We didn't yet have the certificate program, I think, worked out, but I do remember all of that energy around that exciting idea.
Yeah, I think it's great. And we've seen all too often great young veterans get into corporations. They take off, like a herd of wild turtles into the organization, and then about the time they're going to get promoted, then someone says, well, you haven't done any continuing education. What have you been doing at night? And they say, night patrols, and the like. And so our common vision was, hey, let's get them involved, which is healthy, and for the veteran group also. Let's get them connected with others, which is super healthy. Let's give them purpose, and then let's give them, like the Wizard of Oz, give them that piece of paper that says they got a brain and knowledge, so that they can be leaders like they've been hardwired to be. And so that takes us to our other guests who've been so patient listening. But I'll let you go ahead and chat a question with them.
So first, I'd just love to introduce Ivory Harlow, who's a graduate of Ohio State University, MBA, but then came and did our leadership certificate that we've been partnering with NVMM to do. And then Tom White, who's a current student in our Masters of Public Administration program here at Ohio State. Both of them are veterans, Ivory in the U.S. Air Force and Tom in the U.S. Marine Corps. So first off, just love to hear what drove you to military service. What caused you to pursue that path? And Ivory, we'll start with you.
Well, I loved hearing the story of John Glenn, and I wish my story was that patriotic. But I grew up in a small town in rural Minnesota. And it was the kind of town with old names, meaning old family names where people stay there. And I saw two ways out of that town. For the kids that had academics or athletics, they had scholarships to universities. But I wasn't that smart, and I wasn't that great of an athlete. And the other way was the military. So truly, without having anyone in my family that had served, I didn't know anyone that had served. Especially as a female, I didn't know any other females that had served in the military. It was a leap. I didn't have a huge lot of support, but I knew that was my ticket on to other things, so I took that. And I think, even if you don't go with that feeling of patriotism or an understanding really of what that means, you certainly gain that when you enlist. And I think, by that second week of boot camp, I had a deeper understanding of the history of what I had been reading about for years, and what the country was built, and really felt a deeper connection to that. And I knew I made the right decision.
Tom, what about you?
Kind of a sense of duty. Several of my family members served in times of war. I was kind of thinking, I don't really have a lot of options as well. I'm the youngest of 4 children, don't really have access to an education beyond high school. So college was kind of my mind. That was potential as well. Kind of the climate that was going on, the housing crisis was kind of going on. It was around 2010 when I was making this decision, leaving high school. So it was kind of those were really my main drivers. A sense of adventure, I guess, as well. So I mean, the war was going on in Afghanistan still, and that was kind of my mind as well, looking for a fight. I guess joining the Marines, I'm gonna try to get in the first to fight, try and get in.
So how did you choose the Marine Corps? And I asked this, Senator Glenn was so proud to be a Marine.
I guess it was just that was the only place I was gonna go. So that's the only people I talked to. That's the only thing I wanted. Just their core values: honor, courage, commitment. The history that they've had. People like Senator Glenn, all the great things he's done as well. Those are kind of the things that really led me to them and as well.
So Ivory, he was an aviator. How did you choose the Air Force?
Well, it was sort of what the jobs that I saw would have some skills that might transfer. I did a lot of Googling on Google. Like I said, I didn't know anyone that had served in the military, so it was a lot, what do I need to do for basic training? Thank goodness for the internet. But also seeing, there's so many career fields in the Air Force, and I thought, this is something I could leave, walk out, make a living wage, and continue on, whether that was going to be education or what I decided to do after the military.
Often after your tours of duty, be they one enlistment or one go as an officer or a long time, we'd like to say we sort of got our masters in leadership or masters in infantry. What are the big skills that we'll start with you, Ivory, that you think you gained, knowledge, skills, or attributes, and then how did you decide to continue with education in that vein?
Sure. So I think definitely one thing that the military provided and provides to everyone, especially being from a very small town in Minnesota, you are exposed to people from everywhere. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, the military is the most diverse place, but it's also the most inclusive place, right? Because you walk on a base or a post and everybody is suddenly a big family. So I think walking away with that and knowing you could go into any situation, whether it's an educational situation or a work situation, you can go in and seize the moment and use whatever skills that you have to better.
Tom, what's the biggest thing that you think you took from your time in the Marines? And part two, what's the biggest thing that you've given since you've been out of the Marines?
Oh, wow. I would say, I guess, the biggest thing I got from the Marines was just confidence. We always used to say, be confident, not cocky. So that would probably be the biggest thing, that I have the confidence to go do this and tackle any mission. That's probably the biggest thing that I've gotten. And just giving back, I guess, is trying to be that person. So whatever path I blaze, I try to give back to others as well, through mentorship or through any means, through policy, anything that I can do as well, volunteerism. So just continuing that leadership and giving back to others as well.
What challenges have you faced now coming out of the Marine Corps, whether that be just in civilian life broadly or here at Ohio State University?
So when I left the Marine Corps, I did not have an easy transition. I had post-traumatic stress, I dealt with alcoholism, a lot of other issues as well, isolation, suicidal ideation as well. So having a strong support system, family and friends was really helpful. The community at Ohio State, I searched this out. I went to a lot of other universities and a lot of other places and met with their veterans offices and met with other people as well. And this was the most welcoming community that I could find.
And I should forgive the interruption, but I should say, and I should have done this in your introduction, you had a Bachelor's of Science here in social work.
Yes.
How did you choose that degree program?
I bounced around to a couple other degrees before. I was in education for English. I got to do an opportunity at one of the schools here in Columbus. And after seeing that, I realized that I'm more suited for macro level work. Mm-hmm. So, trying to, education policy is something that I've worked on as well. And after doing that, I really got involved with the social justice aspect of social work, 'cause that's what their roots are in. So I'm not really a clinical thinking social worker. I'm more of a policy and social justice thinking. And that's what ultimately led me here, was to get more into policy work.
Excellent, great.
That's great.
Ivory, what about you? What were some of the challenges you faced leaving the Air Force and entering civilian life and the university?
Well, I think as a veteran, but probably even veterans' families, when you leave a military environment, whether even if you're living off base, really, you're surrounded by military people, and there's that sense of community that's there, that's instant when you move into a place. And so when my husband and I came to Ohio, it was sight unseen. So we moved out to a rural place in Ohio where the only time you came across other veterans where you knew was when you were at the VA. And so I guess I never I never knew the value of what that felt like to be with fellow veterans until it was gone. And then realizing I really missed that, and realizing that sense of belonging was something that I really needed. I think, I'm sure later we'll talk about the LCERT program, but I think that that's one virtue of the LCERT program, is that you're with a cohort of veterans. It feels very much like you're all just on base having lunch, or on post, you have an instant sense of connection, and you're working through the LCERT program together. So you also have that feeling when you're on a military base, whether you're working in logistics or whether you're in military police, whatever you're doing this thing together. The LCERT felt very much like that.
Do you know, during the LCERT, did you see folks reaching out to each other to help when someone had an issue with this or an issue with that? What was your experience with our LCERT and the team helping each other out?
Absolutely. I think especially in the small group kind of setting and talking, a lot of times those conversations went way off because everyone got to know each other. Even to the point of where there were others in the group that perhaps had not, been in a higher education setting before, and they were really intimidated by some of that, but being able to help other folks through that was something that I think that was really valuable, both for those that were seeking help and those who were helping, being able to do that with each other, again, in a meaningful way.
As you both went through the program, how much did you see your professors learn about what the veteran ecosystem is? So as we progress week by week, what do you think that Yost and the other gentlemen learned?
So Ivory was in the Leadership Certificate for Veterans program. Why don't we start with you, Ivory, and then we can talk about your experience at the Bachelor's of Science and
Okay, yeah, sure. Thanks for helping.
Master's Public Administration program.
Sure. I truly appreciated the professors in the program's curiosity and openness to having those conversations with veterans in a way that you can tell that they're really interested and really engaged in the person's development throughout that course. So I think, their openness to hearing what folks have to say. I remember our professor during the program said, well, you are sure a passionate bunch, because I tell you to write 5 pages and I get 10 pages, but I'll let it go, because there was so much to talk about, I think, that we hadn't had an opportunity to voice before that program.
Very excellent. Yeah.
So Tom, this was the program that Ivory's talking about, is a program which was a group of veterans altogether. How many were in your class?
I think maybe 14, 15.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep. Whereas you came into a giant university, it's a massive place. There are probably about 2,000 some veterans or military affiliated or active duty here at Ohio State. But that's still, in a university of 60,000 people, that's a small group. Did you feel isolated here at Ohio State, or was there a connective network? And then I want to follow up with General Ferriter's good question about how well do faculty and instructors understand the veteran experience, if at all?
So because this university is so large, I kind of felt at home. It's like being on an installation. So I really enjoy, there's tons of gyms here, there's tons of places to eat, and that's kind of like being on a base. You get to choose what you want to do. So that was something. And then there is a close-knit veteran community here. So you have the veterans group, the Student Veteran of America's group that I joined as well. I was their president for a little while as well. There's a veterans lounge, so you can go hang out with other veterans at any time you want to. So I always felt like there's a close-knit group here, and I always felt welcomed.
What about instructors? I mean, one of the things I often reflect on is, so we have the benefit, Senator Glenn was a man of many colors in the sense that he did so many things. And so we can connect through his story to students in lots of different ways. But I will admit that it was, again, as I said, late in life that we came to know about his veteran experience in that personal way that he told that story. And it was so powerful and profound to him. And as instructors who haven't had much experience in the military, I have family members who currently serve, and my grandfather served in World War II, but he died before I ever got to meet him. So as a faculty member, I don't have my own personal experience. What has your experience been with instructors in the classroom? And what are things that we as instructors could do to make the experience for veterans a more welcoming and inclusive one, to use Ivory's words?
Luckily, I was in social work, so they're always very welcoming people that, you know, they have the interview skills and the listening skills to hear you out and know what's going on. So I had that benefit. With the other instructors around the university, I don't know what that's like for other students. But I had that. I was benefit. You know, that was benefit for myself. Most of the instructors that I do know, they do have some affiliation with the military. One of my mentors, John Provenzano, who's a social worker, he works for the VA and he's an Army veteran. So I always talked to him about, you know, things that I was going through or anything that I needed. He would direct me. So that was always a benefit that, like I said, I had a, you know, really good support structure that I put around myself and network with others to try and find those.
I'm so glad there's a community here you're able to find. Ivory, you did an MBA here at Ohio State University. What was that experience like?
Well, I knew I was going to be okay when I pulled into the parking garage and there's a Brutus dressed in BDUs outside. So, I mean, just the testimony, though, to the fact that Ohio State University really tries to lift up the active duty and the veteran, you know, students that are here on campus. The MBA program was fantastic in providing necessary skills, you know, business acumen, being able to understand financials, those key pieces that you need as a leader in business. But truly, I feel like the LCERT program provided the leadership skills, being able to articulate what you can do to lead an organization, for example. Those kind of critical skills, I feel like the LCERT filled that gap.
So General Ferreter, a question for you.
Okay.
Going back to our meeting in there, so we had that general idea, and then we ultimately crystallized it around the leadership certificate for veterans. You've taught in that program, and as Colonel Butler. What's been your greatest pleasure about participating in that program?
I think one of the pleasures from the first class to the last, you see the individual development, individual confidence coming out, and and tangibly having something that they can use in their life and in their profession. And then seeing the team come together. So that the progression of both of those is really obvious and joyful to see. And then, you know, our aim is to keep them together, you know, do events each year or semi-annual that causes sort of the National Veterans Memorial Museum, John Glenn College Fellows, you know, to because you know, by, with, and through these folks, you know, they're going to go out and they're going to make America super duper. They're going to make their community super duper. They can't help themselves. They're like the retriever with the tennis ball. You know, as soon as they get into a place, they're, you know, just a few suggestions here. You know, I'm new, right? And so that's the number one, and that it worked, and that you've evolved. To great credit to your team in helping us evolve it and make iteration 2 even better than iteration 1, and iteration 3 evolved so that we're relevant to the next group that comes in.
So Senator Glenn was, again, as I said earlier, he just believed in the transformative power of education, and he was a tremendous believer too in lifelong learning. So as much as he focused on K through 12 in his Senate years, he did a lot of his work there, trying to focus on improving the K through 12 space. But then he came here to an institution of higher education and wanted to start an undergraduate degree and then other programs. So for him, it was just sort of about learning throughout one's life. And I'd be interested just to hear you two reflect on whether that also resonates with you. And, you know, is this just a step on the road to the next thing, or is this sort of a fundamental part of what it means to just continue to grow? How powerful is education for you in your life's course?
It's incredibly powerful. So I always view the principle of being a continued learner. So you never stop learning, you never stop being curious. Like you said, Senator Glenn was a very curious person. So I like to take that as well and continue on, you know, his legacy. And this isn't just a stepping stone. You know, I'd like to see myself back here, you know, maybe as a professor one day or reaching out to others and continuing on as well.
Great, thank you. Ivory?
I think lifelong learning is incredibly valuable. You know, some folks can do that by reading books and watching videos and doing their own self-study. Some of us do better when there are parameters around that and there are metrics and we can hold ourselves accountable to programs. So I like thinking of, you know, whether it's a certificate program or a degree program as maybe it's a stepping stone to the next degree program or the next certificate program. But really, you know, once you stop seeking those things and once you stop trying to advance yourself professionally, you stop growing personally as well.
I don't know what your experience was like in the classroom, but one of the things I love about being at an institution like this and just hearing you say the possibility of coming back and teaching at a later date, I never see myself as a teacher, always as a student. I learn from my students, I learn from the material, and the material is constantly changing. So just being in a classroom is just a real pleasure, whether it's an in-person classroom or a virtual one. And so it warms my heart to hear you guys carrying on that fundamental tradition of Senator Glenn, of just always wanting to learn about the world and get better and learn about the world with your peers.
I think it's you know, something that our military members get encultured with and through. They leave home, they got out of mom's basement, and they got out of Minnesota, and then they get to basic, and then they succeed. And there's a really great book called Set Up for Success on transitioning, written by Joel Carpenter, and they get to their first unit, and then all that gear that they touched once in basic is in front of them, and now they have to go from familiar to mastery. And so they have to be curious, and they have to ask the question, how does this work? As do the officers that have the soldiers or sailors or airmen, marine underneath them. And then in about 3 years, or during that time period, you deploy into the combat zone or not. But at the third year, you're probably going to move. Mm-hmm. And it could be part of military education or just the next unit. And so it starts again. So it sort of almost, you would feel stagnant if you were in the same squad, you know, in your 8th year, unless you're in the Rangers or something like that, where they want to never leave. But you would feel like, hey, I'm not progressing. Yeah. And also I think most young military members are watching the fastest progressing friend of theirs. Mm-hmm. Oh, Joe got his degree and I'm a corporal. Oh, Joe has his own business, or Sally has her own business. And so I think that also gives an internalized drive to improve, to challenge, master, move to the next level. Yeah. What's the next challenge for you?
Well, I would say probably one of the greatest benefits of the LCERT program is within 30 days of graduating that program, I was offered a new position in a nonprofit, in a leadership position, which I took. Yeah. Thank you. So I am 5 weeks into that now. But it's been fantastic opportunity for me to take. So I think that's the uphill battle from here on.
I think it's amazing, Ivory, because leadership, as we said, is who you are, and management is our tools and what we do, at least my opinion. And so you can't be in a leadership position unless you have people to lead. So do you have people to lead?
Yes. Yes.
So So, I mean, what a feeling. How's that feel?
It feels wonderful. It's also, butterflies in your stomach. But that's something that is also really exciting. That keeps you getting out of bed and excited for every day. So.
And then, so why did you walk into our rally point when you walked into our rally point? So rally point was a brunch. We would set up and invite all the veterans, anyone who wanted to come, and want to make sure they weren't living in a car, make sure that they weren't hurting bad, and make sure that they had employment, and then later that they understood what their benefits were from the VA and from Department of Labor. And again, just kind of one of those, let's give it a go, invent it and see what happens. And then you walked in, and tell us how you got there. And
So I've been connected with the NVMM since the beginning. So I went to the opening ceremony and all that. So it was really a great ceremony to be part of. I went to the rally points for camaraderie, to continue with that community, here in Columbus. Just the network as well. So that's something that I've always worked for. Me and my other fellow students, that we always we say network until you die. So you build out that network. It's always about who you know, not always what you know. So that was another big component as well.
did you get what you were looking for?
Yes.
Great. So Trevor, having now the benefit of hearing all of this, I don't often like this word, but how do you feel about what you've created?
Well, I can't claim any credit for it because, again, you and I did this to start, and then that quickly involved bringing lots of other people in to make it all come to fruition. So I feel good about what the team's produced, and I loved your description earlier, for example, of the Leadership Certificate for Veterans program. We just continue to evolve and get better. I think Senator Glenn was always about self-improvement and collective improvement, and so I think just knowing that it's delivering value, and by it I mean your experience in the Leadership Certificate program, the rally point that this is a part of, the degree programs that you've been a part of here at Ohio State University. There's a real joy that comes about being a part of that, and an excitement about how we keep evolving and making it better and trying to get more veterans involved in these programs. Just hearing success stories like this, knowing that it's always a journey, and that there will be other challenges that come in your way, but that's exciting to know that we made some things that are adding some value, and let's figure out how to make some more, get more people in.
That's great. So as we wrap up, Ivory, if you were talking to a group of veterans out there who are watching this, what advice would you give them based on your experiences of transitioning, employment, continuing education, and now leadership?
I think back to our graduation with the LCERT program, and one of those individuals that was in the cohort that said, I was really intimidated by all those papers we had to write. And he had that certificate in his hand, and he was like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done, which, we're thinking is probably not the hardest thing you've ever done. But to him, it really represented something, and also representing that he could do it, So I think that's what I would say. You have to start, know that you can do it. You'll walk away having done it, and then knowing what you can do after that.
That's great. And Tom, how about you?
Pretty much along the same lines that, whatever you want to go achieve, you have the capability of doing it. And wherever you're at in life, don't be afraid of, there's imposter syndrome where you're like, okay, I'm here. Am I worthy of this? You are worthy. That would be the biggest thing I say, is that you're worthy, and wherever you're at, you're where you're meant to be. So just continue on the road, and you'll get where you need to be going. It's all about the journey sometimes, not always the destination.
Oh, well said. So if you're out there and you need some help, then reach out to us, reach out to your friends, reach out to your family. Don't suffer in silence. And if you're out there and you're Army strong or Marine strong or Air Force strong or Navy strong or Coast Guard strong or Space Force strong, then reach out to one of your buddies and make sure they're okay. This is a holiday season coming towards us, and it's very challenging for the veterans and for anyone else who is not connected with a strong support cycle. So reach out and make a difference. And Dean, allow you to close us out on this wonderful program today.
Well, I'll just thank you and Ivory and Tom for joining us in this reflection of Senator Glenn and this celebration of military services, public service, and to all those watching, thank you for allowing us to keep his legacy alive in his 100th year. Sadly, some people don't even know who he is as the world gets younger in some ways. So it's important to keep talking about him and tell stories about him because they're such powerful and profound reflections of who we are as a community. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Throughout our 120 years, Ford has supported our nation's armed forces and honored their selfless service to our country. The Central Ohio Ford dealers are proud to continue this tradition by investing in the work of the National Veterans Memorial and Museum in Columbus. Together, we want to share the veterans' heroic stories and introduce a grateful nation to the faces behind our forces. Please join us monthly to hear inspiring educational stories from our veterans who have gone above and beyond their call to defend freedom around the world. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum and your Central Ohio Ford dealers. Together, we will never forget.